I think it's like, to me, it's, this foe that you're talking about, or this dark side, or the destructive side that, yeah, maybe it's always around the foe, in this realm of life for us and through history. And yet, it needs more balance. The path of light, the path of healing, the path of wisdom needs to grow right now to balance it out. It's not that necessarily we're going to conquer the foe and it's never going to be rise again. I like Lord of the Rings, it's like they're going to, they're going to take them down and they'll probably try to come back one day stronger than ever. And it'll be another round, but we're trying to come out of that. The times were such that the greed and everything, had a little more latitude and people kind of forgot how bad it could get, if we just give ourselves over to that and, indulge in that and romanticize that.
Welcome to the Two Curious MD podcast. I'm Dr. Ali Ahmed.
And I'm Dr. Soraya Rahman.
With the wisdom from holistic, alternative, and these conventional medicine, we are here to challenge the status quo.
We're curious about the connectivity and complexity between diverse fields of knowledge as they relate to consciousness, chronic illness, mental health, resilience, and beyond.
Learning more about the art and science of healing, or listening to stories of extraordinary healing. You're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Two Curious MD podcast, where medicine is more than science. It's story, art, connection. And we are here today with Dr. Joe Tafur, and Simi is going to introduce him. And so excited to have you on the podcast, Joe. And thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Soraya. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Today is April 19th, 2026, exactly 2 years to the date. That is significant in your life, and we'll be discussing that. So it feels like a very full circle moment. Today on Two Curious MDs, we are incredibly honored to welcome a guest who truly embodies the bridge between modern science and ancient wisdom. Joe Tafur, MD, is a family physician, a researcher, and an author who has spent decades exploring the frontiers of spiritual healing. Since his seminal work, The Fellowship of the River, Joe has been a leading voice in the psychedelic renaissance, particularly through his nonprofit Modern Spirit, where he works to demonstrate the value of spiritual care in modern healthcare. He joins us today to discuss his newest book, Medicine Song, A Spiritual Healing in the Psychedelic Renaissance. And to help us navigate the complex landscape of psychedelic medicine in 2026, we are those dorks, Joe. we read your book. Key points that we'll go through. So really wonderful to have you. And
as you mentioned, I think we'll start right with April 19th, because that's a day of significance for me personally. It's my son's birthday. And he was born 24 years ago. And as I was reading, I finished your book, both of them, in fact, The Fellowship of the River and this one. And it's a signed copy for my audience. I'm so happy and proud to have a signed copy. But April 19th, as we were discussing in the intro, tell us about that date in April 19, 2024, which you allude to in the book when you're at UCLA at a conference and you got that email from the DEA. What was that moment like for you?
I think in the book I talk about how I just happened to wake up very early that morning. I went to college at UCLA and I did family medicine at UCLA. And so, but to be on the campus where I went to college, they have a hotel now on campus that wasn't there when we were in college, very close to the center of like the student center and all that stuff, the student union. And so I was in the hotel and I woke up like at 5 or something and I just checked my email and I got a message from the DEA that we had gotten our exemption for, we had given a couple licenses for our spiritual community in Arizona, the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, which had been in a prolonged lawsuit with the U.S. government to ask for religious protection for our ayahuasca ceremony. To work with ayahuasca, sacred plant medicine from South America, to work with it in sacred ceremony that would be respected under the religious freedom protections in the United States, as there were 2 prior churches, Brazilian-based churches, the Santo Daime and the UDV. That was like 2009 and 2006. So it had been a while since anybody had got through with any kind of exemption for working with ayahuasca or any kind of sacred plant medicine with the DEA. And so we had been through a process and settled with the government and signed the settlement with the Department of Justice over our lawsuit to withdraw our lawsuit in exchange for a couple things, a number of things, including having them pay for our legal fees for infringing on our rights, but also to receive DEA licenses to import ayahuasca and manufacture ayahuasca and distribute, through this protection to also be allowed to distribute it in ceremony. And so we had the settlement, we had the lawyers, we had the Department of Justice, we had all this, exchange going on where we signed the documents, but there was no, you don't know when you're going to hear about it and nobody knows, and there's no guidance and there's no one to call to say there's no one to call, to ask, hassle, or to bother. And so it was, I think it was in February where we kind of initiated, signing the settlement, somewhere around there. So it had been a couple months and you're just in limbo. And I happened to be there at UCLA right around that time, which for me is a special time because also one of our holidays that we're trying to promote as a spiritual community is Earth Day, which is this upcoming week, Earth Day. And it's around following the equinox, and for the Christians and the Catholics, the Easter that we just went through, and the Passover and all these other, the equinox, the spring, the new season. And then Earth Day being potentially like a global holiday that somehow the Earthlings could all come together around. We're, very interested in that. And so for it to hit me that morning when I wake up and I happen to be on campus. So I talk about how I go, since I was there, I was like, I'm going to go to the botanical garden on campus because I know it's still there from when we were in school and it's a special place. And just go out there and kind of have my moment and pay my respects to nature and to the spirituality. And so I had that moment, and then I got back, and Ryan and I were our mutual friend. I was lecturing at USC, thanks to Rael, my old colleague, who's in the book as well, who we both the reason I'm in San Diego right now is because both of us were invited to present the book and the ideas from the book at our medical school, almost 27 years later, in a school where those things were seen as, they were so radical that the idea that we would be accepted back to talk about my work and his work, that he's doing research on mindfulness and psilocybin at USC in LA. And so I happened to be there speaking at USC and was able to announce it to the crowd that this is what's happened. So it was beautiful,
Yeah. So I'm really curious how it was to go back to your medical school after all these years. As physicians, we know that, the risks that both you and Rael early in medical careers to go off and do the work that you did and the research that you did brought with it some of that stigma that's attached to psychedelics. And I wonder how that felt now.
Well, and then this week, by the way, so I guess yesterday, right, for our dear President Trump.
Oh, right.
Signed this executive order, right? To, I guess, I haven't read the details, but somehow to accelerate, right, approval of psychedelic treatments in the United States.
Yeah.
So that happened yesterday from an executive order from the president. And so earlier this week, Monday, was when we presented at the medical school. But, I went to medical school from 1999 to 2003. During that time, Rael, my friend, had started HiMed, which was the humanistic and integrative medical school interest group.
Yeah.
And that community of HiMed actually helped seed what later became the Center for Integrative Medicine at UCSD. So we know a lot of the people that have been involved, faculty, et cetera, that shaped and, gave rise to what became the Center for Integrative Medicine. And the prior director was there and as a friend of ours. And then the current director, who was also a friend of ours, who's a very open-minded individual, integrative oncologist with a big career at UCSD and in San Diego area, who's a very spiritually oriented person who often happens to be Argentinian background. And so he invited us and hosted us. So we were being kind of brought back in with open arms from something that we were kind of part of at the beginning. Rael started out as one of the members, just a founding member, just going to the meditation classes with Rael. So to see it kind of take on this life and kind of as a paradigm shift and a changing of the times, which is part of what the medicine song and book is about. is that there's this very interesting shift in the paradigm happening.
Yeah.
All of us, it's so concerning and so worrisome the way things are going. When you go from the 1990s to the 2020s, a lot has happened and a lot has changed. And so despite, some of the very kind of scary things that are developing, there is this upswell of a lot of other things. And so where we get open arm, welcomed. And at the beginning, we talked to Dan a little bit. And there's a little discussion of like, okay, well, we were hoping that this makes it onto the website of the university. And so let's try and not, don't go crazy here. Like, let's keep them coming over, and let's not talk about anything illegal, et cetera, on top, or maybe spiritual. Let's, be careful or be wise. And so then we got into the discussion and then eventually the questions. And I think it's going to make it on the website according to them. And they were happy with it. But I think eventually the conversation did become very open-minded and really rooted in patient care and healing.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell them. I said it there and I've said it many other places, is that what's driving this, let's say this open-mindedness towards psychedelic treatments that now Donald Trump and others are now getting behind, is not some kind of woo-woo mind wake up. That's not what's driving it.
Yeah.
It's the suffering. It's the suffering of the society. That's the reason that this thing has become a national priority, is because the current system is somehow involved in driving things into the ground. And so we need to reflect on where we might be able to readjust, because too much is falling through the cracks within a first world so-called healthcare system. Why is there so much disease? Why is there so much illness? Why is there so much mental health suffering? And so because we're trying to figure that out, and the other paradigms who are so sure of themselves about how things work are coming up short, and everybody kind of knows it. And so any kind of arrogance that was coming up from behind that is losing its kind of luster. So people will need a little more than that, And so that's what's opening the mind and then the heart of the system. That was our experience speaking at the medical school. I found them to be a very receptive environment.
I can even ask a little follow-up to that, because not only are we talking about this is not just woo, this is not just, some ideas out of a dusty book. This is epigenetics, right? And your work in the research on epigenetics kind of correlates with, the evidence for what we're talking about here. Is that something is materially changed and shifted when we're in trauma, and something is materially changed and shifted when we're healed, and we can actually measure that. And that's a very interesting space that we're heading into. I'd love to hear your work on that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that does speak to the advances in science. Science is not without its merits, of course. And so now we're getting enough fine-tuned measurement capacity to explore questions about epigenetics and also explore questions about things like neuronal networks. What is their role? That we have, I know that Alia is using, brain mapping and things even in the clinic to direct, treatment approaches. So this is new kind of areas that kind of are catching up to give us something to talk about from the measurable data world, while, the reality that the human consciousness is one of our most powerful instruments within this realm that we also need to learn how to integrate and utilize in a more effective manner.
What I would say to that, medical education, as we're seeing it now, the dynamic flourishing of medical knowledge, or even knowledge in general, it's so intricate, and we're not doing justice to what we're educating in our residents and students. And, we're kind of simplistic in how we understand the human body, the human mind, and not even bringing the ideas of spirituality to healing. The placebo effect, is an effect. The complexity of the neuronal networks. I can't even imagine how it is. If I was a cell in the human body, I was trying to imagine what would the cell look like, because it's getting all this messaging from neurotransmitters, from chemicals, from the mitochondria, from oxygen, from glucose, from just the chemicals, the activation, the pathways, the biochemistry, the interaction it's making with other cells and other systems. Sitting there imagining this little cell getting all these signals. How does it even know? How does it even know what it needs to make, what it needs to shut down? It's just so complex and layered. And we're not even talking about that. We are very systems oriented, very systems, cellular science. We're kind of loculated in how we educate about the body, GI systems, cardiac, but no one's talking to each other. And the body continues to engage in all of the different systems and its environment, and at the cellular level and at the macro level. So I know we kind of veered off into this different topic, but it's
important. I think it's important because it speaks to again, we're talking about this, consciousness or human consciousness and its role in all of this is that it's really, there is an experiential part of this. Like, what do we know about the cell and its activity and its behavior, et cetera? Is like, well, I mean, we're made out of cells, we know that, and the cell is alive and we are alive. And so there is a huge amount of wisdom within our being to try to understand what in fact is going on or how does it function. And so we are aware at some level of that, down to ourselves, et cetera. And so then it encourages us to explore, as you are doing, like training and understanding that it's going to be more experiential. That's going to open people's consciousness, whether that's a meditation, experience for doctors or art or storytelling or all these things, these macro level activities that are going to make use of an integrated human consciousness. That's going to be a lot more powerful. I would go ahead and say that to help people connect to that kind of understanding. And so they need those kinds of experiences. Articulating out all the, pathways and everything is very interesting. It's very important. We can learn something from that, but integrating that, it's very difficult, at the current state of, like you said, staring at some schematic of the way the cell metabolism works is lost on us. Maybe artificial intelligence or something interacting with that around that would be somehow informative. I don't think staring at that is informative. So there needs to be something that's a little telling the full story of that thing is alive.
Exactly. And I love how your story brings you at it from, you decided to go to the practitioners who have been integrating this knowledge and using this knowledge for generations and learning it through their processes. I mean, just the process that you describe of the dieta, where somebody abstains from all sorts of external sources of different energies, like abstaining from food of certain kinds or sex or, salt and spices and things like that, so that something about their kind of body shifts them to being able to be open to a different kind of knowledge. And you describe that so well in both your books. And then there's that moment when you're in the ayahuasca journey with Manuel Vásquez, and he digs his hand into your stomach. And you say, he dug his fingers deeper into my abdomen than I thought possible, under my ribs, into my solar plexus, and around my liver and gallbladder. I thought for sure the intense pressure would make me purge, but instead I felt a release of tension. My organs relaxed. There was more space inside to breathe. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right?
That was this is all happening. That's an old generation Shipibo healer, Manuel Vásquez, that many people have had the experiences with him. And at that time, it was a while ago, like 2008 or something. I know that, I'm pretty sure he's still alive, and I know his son. And so that was like, in the early days of me going down there and experience. So then you're in ayahuasca experience, in the ceremony, and kind of a strong experience. And so you go through the process of him singing Icaro to you, the healing song, and that journey. And at that time, I was, very altered, and it was very magical and kind of unbelievable. It's very surprising to me, the way they seemed to be interacting with the energies within my body. And then at the end of that, he, not always, but I guess when he felt called to do it, he just, would say, échate, like lay down, means like throw your body on the ground. And so you lay down, and then, I didn't know. He's just like, okay, yes, sir. And then he starts digging around into my guts. And we started talking about, because one of the themes that I kind of weaved through the book was the, the loss of my father. And so I was coming there around that time when I was about 6 months out, trying to work through the grief around my father, and had other experiences that were more difficult or more challenging, but this one was just kind of handing myself over to him without that much, a little bit of discussion with him directly, but him really focusing on his intuitive capacity, within the ceremony to work on me and then to feel into my body, himself also having taken at least a small amount of ayahuasca to explore in my body. And like I said, just seems so intrusive in a way, as far as into my abdomen, but then provided all this relief. And you hear that a lot about like this good, at least that form of healing, this traditional Shipibo healing, when they're kind of well aligned with what they're doing, it just seems so right. The song, the rhythm, the tone, it just kind of seems to be in tune.
Yeah.
With what's in front of them. And so then a huge part of the training and the dieta is about developing that, and developing that through these particular techniques that you want to be in tune with the song or in tune with this touch that some people may do. And that the interesting thing of their tradition is, compared to other traditions, like intuitive traditions, or where people are going to develop skill sets through, let's say, meditation or mindfulness or other forms of retreat or abstinence, which we do see all over the world, right?
Yep.
But in this particular one, it's guided by the plants. They say the jungle, the nature, these master plants are the ones that are going to teach you how to do that.
Right.
And it sounds so strange and wild, but then I went through that process, and maybe it's not for everybody, but for me, I did gain something from that was very surprising to me.
I mean, we're in 2026 now, even where the perspective on plant intelligence and its kind of understanding of the scientific basis of it, we've got a lot more data now to actually tell us a lot more about this idea of what is plant intelligence. And when you're in that bowl in the jungle and with all the animals and the plants and the human beings as kind of like the intermediaries, you really are being worked upon by the plant intelligence, by the intelligence that's around you in this 360 manner. And the plants, can you explain a little bit about the Icaro? Because, when we talk about sound now, there's also a lot of research being done about how sound and our neurobiology interconnect. We've got now a lot of interesting data coming out about, if you align TMS with music, it's more effective. It's like, okay, that just happened.
Right.
And, we've been using ultrasound forever for detection as well as, intervention like lithotripsy, where sound has been used to blast open, so that this particular nature of sound as technology is it's in the title of your book, Medicine Song. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. Medicine song, and this idea of like vibration and frequency, that comes up a lot, and in our like broader understanding. And a friend of mine today, we were just talking to an integrative pain doctor who recommended for somebody who was really struggling with this kind of sciatica and bone spurs in their lower back, some kind of ultrasound technique that was supposed to break up the tissue to facilitate healing. I hadn't heard about that one, but it was for its actual physical, effects, not just for, like you said, there's breaking stones in the kidneys, but now like releasing something in the tissue and also activating something through the frequency.
Right.
Somehow bringing the tissue into a certain frequency that we understand that there would be some kind of influential frequencies within the body. We know that we study things like the EKG, and the brain waves, where the picture, the image of the frequency, that you can imagine, like the EKG, if it was 3-dimensional, and like you can see this happening, right? But imagine like from here that would be a 3-dimensional phenomenon that's pulsing through the entire
and
system.
Energy and magnetism, and that it has its remnants further outfield and closer in.
Well, and it's direct and actually plumbed in to a blood vessel system that's flowing through the entire system.
Right.
So like really, really, and then we see like, we're just learning about like the circulatory system of plants, of this, pulling, water up a redwood to the top. Yeah. And all the, whatever that involves, and, the physics of it, but I'm sure that there's frequencies, and there's physics, and then within the physics, there's frequencies and energies and harmonies that play a role. And there's like coherences that happen. You hear that heart math, or the brain heart coherence, even the electric systems, and how that would be so important. And then the autonomic nervous system, and that way that's flowing in the vagal system and the polyvagal. And so all these systems that have their rhythm, and like the heart rate variability as an example of that. The truth is, like, I guess that the heart rate is controlled by kind of a yin and a yang of a sympathetic system that's kind of saying, hey, let's speed up. And the person will say, hey, let's slow down. And it's the dance between the two that's, creating this rate that's fluctuating within a kind of rhythm that turns out there's kind of a more harmonious type of one of those, and increased variability within that is not perfect, but it's still on time. Right. And there's something healthy about that in the system. And you want that flexibility and that versatility. So all those things are at play in the biological system, on top of things that are happening at the biochemical level. And so by connecting to nature, what we were talking about at the beginning, and trying to really kind of bring to life your own living spirit, that which is participating in that. Yeah. Not that which is like observing it or analyzing it or, no, that's like, actually, I am that. And then within the forest, which doesn't have that pretense, it's not like troubled by this like cortex. Yep. That's going to be like thinking, am I really doing that? Like just pure being in awareness of its pure being, the animals, the plants, and the ecosystem functioning in its own set of frequencies together in a sustainable, symphony. And so that becomes, in this case, for the Icaros, that becomes the music for you to follow. And so you train to sing Icaro listening to the forest, because the forest is loud at night around you. And so you're going to come into that rhythm and use that to guide you, to make sure you're kind of, not off key, so to speak, to be guided by this community of nature, where say, the natural system, the ecosystem, there's so much we can learn from it, and the forest bathing and all that kinds of stuff that is, gaining more attention, and any kind of reconnection and re-immersion. And those environments can be so helpful to people in so many circumstances. And any urban planning that doesn't keep that in mind, is just a cultural dead end, I would say. Right. Waiting to come around, and until the health declines in the community far enough that people wake up to say, we can't leave our children in that kind of circumstance. Right. We need to do something about that and bring more access to that natural harmonious rhythm from the nature back into our lives, because it's such a resource. Yeah. And the living system, like I say, which is existing in this realm of, with all of its mysteries, and is in full awareness of the transcendent aspects of our universe, quantum matter. The tree is completely aware, as much as everything else is. Yeah. And so then the natural ecosystem provides this example, like I say, of what a loving, supportive community looks like, that can create an environment for you to be safely held in your vulnerability without judgment. And so the forest can teach you how to provide that.
That's poetry. I just felt like I saw that kind of, the forest can teach you because it can show you that you can attune with it and that there's something there to attune to.
Yes.
And you have spent years in that
That's
attunement and in listening. And it almost feels like, as you're describing, and when we talk about the quantum realm and all these kind of unseen forces, you could describe, how does a spider web, accurately always build itself on this template, it feels like, right? It gets it right each time,
Right.
And there's some field lines that we know that migrating birds and butterflies and, migrating animals, whales follow as they're traversing our great planet. And I feel like what you're describing is that in the Amazon, we figured out, or the people of the traditions that connect with this great life, this sacred earth, this being, somehow found their way to that alignment and then held it and developed it. And that became who they were. And that was their role in this great unfolding.
Yes. Like, I think there's definitely a truth to that, and a beautiful shining example from the Amazonians, and many other indigenous traditions or ancestral traditions that are connected to sacred spaces and places that are interrelated with nature all over the world. And it's also kind of a testament to the reality that we're all like tuning to our environment. And so that's part of the apparatus of the human being. And so just as we kind of get tuned in and can drive home on autopilot and not even remember, where we went, or just go through our routines in our house, we're communicating with our environment at that level, at that intimate, in-depth level, and we're heavily influenced in a strong way by the environment.
Yeah.
And so it's something for us to consider. And that's why I say, hey, it's so nice for us to think about bringing more of that natural influence into our environments, because it can help us tune to a more physiologically harmonious frequency.
And I'm, very aware now that we do ketamine therapy, that one of the things that we let people know after they've had a psychedelic experience, let's say with ketamine, is that they're going to be more sensitive to disharmony and harmony.
Yeah.
And people notice that, right? It's like, don't go out in traffic right after. People don't like, traveling an hour home, because by then the nervous system has gone back to that same set point that it needed to be able to resist. So I feel like sometimes what we're learning from the nervous system is that it's reacting to and coping with, and living in a disharmonious rhythm kind of in this way in our modern life. And that is kind of at the baseline of our ailments, if you want to talk about it on that frequency level in some way. Does that kind of...
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah.
It's been like, the sum of the, like I said, because it's maybe not as holistically minded. So that, in other words, that would take into account these realities of that, although they may be subtle and maybe people may not notice until they're on ketamine or coming off of mushrooms. In some cases, some people may be more sensitive and struggling with the current situation more than the others, but the system could get a little bit jaded and callous to, this. And so it's a factor. And so then what is it adjusting to? And then because the considerations of, let's say, the development of the city, were too abstract, that they were too abstract, derived from ideas around, just like, some of them are very practical. Some of them are maybe overly materialistic and denying the influence of some of these other subtle things that we're talking about. And so then you dig yourself into a hole, paint yourself into a corner where you've created an environment that doesn't take into account the kinds of things that maybe now we can measure. They said, oh, that's nothing. And now you can measure it down the road. Is, oh, this is hard on people. That's hard on people. This is hard on people.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of like waking up and trying to find the balance. And so then there's some balance there, because you could have some kind of new age movement, or maybe claiming more than it has evidence for, or somehow saying things in a way that somehow is not gaining the traction, with the larger society. And so that's why I say, well, let's start focusing on the health and well-being. Let's use the health and well-being to help indicate to us, are we out of alignment?
Yeah.
That would be key.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you call this word greed rot. Is that what you're referring to in the book?
Yeah. Greed rot would be an example of that, of exactly this, of where the driving force is something that is unhealthy.
Yeah.
Openly unhealthy in its origins. And so we know that, everybody knows that, but then to really illuminate it in a way that's like, well, what is it actually? So then right now we're going through this thing where we've been, like so many areas in the world, putting on a pedestal the most greedy. And, there's one thing to be successful and to be ambitious, but there's another there. And so then that's fine, and be able to produce and make things happen and job creator, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. But then there's this level of greed, that is warned about in all the spiritual traditions around the planet. And then in the case of greed, where we could say, okay, at what point does this look like some kind of emotional disturbance? And in the same way, like any other form of addiction. So we're learning more and more about addiction, and learning that this addiction to alcohol or to other substances in many cases is kind of rooted in trauma, rooted in some kind of emotional instability or disequilibrium or problem that within the system seeks to get out of how it feels and wants some kind of mood altering experience to happen. So it goes to food addiction, or it goes to, drugs and alcohol, or gambling, or the thrill of, material wealth. Mm-hmm. And so we see in the associated thrills that you would have access to. Okay. Mm-hmm. In the case of alcohol, where, as a doctor, that there's a criteria when you're going from, drinking alcohol as an adult to problem use, to, addiction or disease, mental health problem.
Yeah.
And there's a criteria that it involves, like having trouble, at work, having trouble with your family, getting in trouble with the law, lying about what you're doing. There's these set criteria that kind of indicate, oh, this is actually not like, you're not just a fan of wine. You could have a little major trauma issue that needs some help, or you have a mental health problem, or you have a major emotional disturbance brewing inside you. And so when we see people do that with their greed, I would say we should very clearly be able to indicate that that is exactly that kind of problem. When they start poisoning the water where their children drink, when they start harming their own families and their communities, recklessly, then that's a sign of a deep emotional problem. And so I call that greed rot.
I love that.
So
I love that
when
word.
Society has fallen to prey to the greed rot, something becomes grotten.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is such a great word
really
for our time right now. With the increasing, it's the increasing inequities. It's the absolute just greater and greater kind of wealth accumulation, and just this lack of empathy that comes from that. And yes, absolutely.
It brings disease. Clearly, it brings disease. When we talk about frequencies and energies and everything you're talking about, it brings disease. Quite often, the person suffering with greed rot has to take a pill to go to sleep, has to take a pill to wake up, has to take a pill to do this, to do that, to, everything is pharmacologically supplemented.
Yeah. And
because the system is strained.
It is strained. And, our plants teach us this, right? It's like if you have a plant that's adapted to the desert and you water it too much, right? It will rot. It's out of balance with its ecosystem. Yeah. That plant, that body, that being has a certain healthy movement of minerals and nutrients and water.
Yeah.
And when it's out of
Parameters.
balance, parameters. And that's what you're talking about here, is that happens in humans when our greed, our need for material goods becomes pathological. And then substance abuse problems are kind of a layer on top of that, because that's just a symptom of that disbalance.
Yeah.
And that's how they come to light. But that disconnectedness that is at the root of it is that disharmony.
Yes.
It's like I, as a being, don't feel harmonized with everything I'm in. And therefore, it starts a process of searching, grasping, needing.
Yes.
And that is so identified with, that becomes a personality. That becomes a way of life. That becomes, well, that's culture. That's who we are. Which has happened in the Western world.
So that's
which is
kind of correct.
right.
That's the kind of culture that would create an urban planning scenario that would leave a lot of people in unhealthy circumstances.
Right. That makes sense. That makes sense. Absolutely. And
because someone is supposedly making money off of that.
Right.
To supposedly make them happy because they bought a boat.
Right.
And turns out they're not happy.
No, because that is not even part of what's making them unhappy.
Yeah, it's not really working out.
Yeah.
Too disconnected, as you said.
Exactly. And what we're noticing in psychedelic healing is that time and again, we are seeing people becoming more nature connected, more connected to themselves, more connected to their communities. And so you're right in stating at the beginning that we're coming to this opening up to psychedelic medicine through suffering, because that's how big change happens in human beings. We have to be humbled. And now we are at the place where we are kind of understanding how it's working.
Back to your question, though, about coming full circle, right? Where we're coming full circle to your historical past, to your father's story. Tell us a little bit about that experience that you had with your father on the bench, on that sunset view, and the dream that you had. And why was that important to you in that very moment in your life?
It's kind of like a little bit of a thread through the book, and I love my father. I've come from a very supportive family in general. And so, I'm grateful, and not trying to overly criticize him or anything, but just the honesty of what it's like to be alive and be a human being and the different things that might impact us or affect us. So I opened the book talking about my big car accident, right, when I was 16, 17, and got ejected from a rolling car and had this big kind of spiritual opening. And my dad was a psychiatrist. He's a doctor and spiritually oriented. But anyways, it was just... my circuits were kind of blown, and surviving that and getting taken away in a helicopter and coming to the hospital that way, and coming into a hospital where my dad used to work and where he was given some room to, walk in and talk to people and tell people what's going on. And then trying to imagine in retrospect, like his shock, of receiving the phone call of your son was just ejected from a car and a helicopter and he's at the hospital and why don't you come? And him trying to, I guess, compose himself through that, and then coming in and just being overwhelmed. And then the care was incomplete that I had. There was a bunch of glass in my leg under my shorts that no one saw, that he discovered. And then, he's angry with them over that and protecting me. And so coming out of all that experience and going back to the car with him, being released from the hospital under his care, and walking, with crutches with some stitches to the car, and just him being angry, and this, I guess he's overwhelmed with his emotions and doesn't know. And so then me kind of shutting down a little bit in that state, and maybe in other circumstances, right? Just that he just wasn't, who knew what to do in that time, I didn't even know, I didn't think about how that was affecting me, and just having to kind of like put that away. Whatever that experience was, as open-minded as my family is and was, but nobody really knew what I went through. And so there I was with that, and then having to go back into normal rhythm of life, and, having anxiety from the accident and different things, and like, whoa, just your system is a little fried. And I'd been in a few car accidents before that as a passenger. So it was just like strange luck, so it was intense. So then going all the way to the end of the book, where I talk about having a ketamine experience after all these ayahuasca ceremonies and so many healings from this Shipibo healer and many others, and then having a psychotherapist caring for me while I'm on ketamine, and having her pull on threads in me as if it was like the Icaro, and feeling it that way and experiencing it that way, and her just, and me working on my relationship issues. And then she says, I think there's a hurt in your heart that you haven't, healed. And it's not that was the only hurt in my heart, but that's what came up. It's a layer, right?
Yeah.
It's more complicated. And it's not all my dad's fault. It's a layer that I had not addressed. And the layer was, it took me back to that moment of just feeling the shutdown that happened when I was like, and so reliving the way that we walk people through it, and ayahuasca ceremony that I've been part of many times, where you're having people in a spiritual realm, reparent themselves or do provide what, our family was not aware of or capable of providing in that time. And just like holding myself, like the way I wanted to be held, the way I hope my dad held me. That was my experience. And just that feeling layers of kind of anxiety just shed, in that moment, in those experiences. And so it was this kind of, and then it went into other things, but that was a big deal that happened to me on ketamine. And it was a big kind of discovery. And I really felt like, whoa, something shifted. I was able to shift something. And so it was a little while later. And so in the book, I talk about the way dreams are, similar portals to some of these psychedelic experiences, some people's deeply spiritual experiences. And that a lot of people have contact with deceased loved ones, even in ketamine. I've seen it happen many times, in ayahuasca for sure. And then in dreams, many people describe this. So it was like in the wake of that, of like, what I was like, oh, I wish my dad was able to be a little more touchy with me.
Yeah. It held you.
I could have used more of that. Like, I think I didn't realize that because that's not the way we were.
Yeah.
So then to have him come to me in a dream after all that, when I'm sleeping out in the desert next to beautiful hot springs and among beautiful people.
Yeah.
And just have him come visit me and put his arm around me and lean on me and be like, I get it.
Yeah.
And sharing that.
Moment that
it was a nice,
yeah.
it was a beautiful thing. And I think, when my mom read it, she was like a little bit like, oh, like, what did we screw you up? Like, no, that kind of thing. And then, but she's like, no, it's good. It's honest. It's what people, they need to hear it. And so I was like, it was a layer. I tried to say that in the book too. It isn't the whole story, but it was an example of the kind of healing that happens. And it was for the art of the storytelling, a way to full circle.
Yeah.
So that's what that dream was about.
Yeah. So much of this kind of work or psychedelic work or even our own healing work and the healing work we see in others is in those moments of connection where we make connection either with the song, with that hummingbird that you describe as well in the book, with what nature has to tell us and the connection that it's speaking, and then the connection of our past and the connection of the people, and even that spiritual connection for people who have passed. I think I've also witnessed this many times over with patients, particularly with ketamine. Of course, primarily I have most experience with ketamine.
Right.
But and when we're talking about integrative and the circuitry and the neuronal network, is there something particular about ayahuasca and ketamine that hits that memory circuit?
It's a good question. I would say that it happens with other substances too. And so then I talk about it in the book. I throw that out there and just for fun that, and there was, I have my friend Raul is a neuroscientist and EEG researcher. And, I've met Robin Card Harris and through these circles and these people who are the big like neuroscientists. And then you see, I was in the University of Texas, Austin, and the guy's trashing the default mode network research. You hear all these different perspectives, but I think up to that point and what I was exposed to and that knowledge, there was a theme of this default mode network that I would say that there's networks. And the networks being these kind of functional patterns in the brain that are kind of magical rhythms and part of the reality of this magical liveliness, vitality that we were talking about.
Yeah.
The spirit for us is like the way you're sitting in forest and also something scares the birds and all these birds.
Yeah.
Like these things are happening within us like that, in different ways. And they're patterns and things that can be overly conditioned from the past and that can be so kind of caught in loops and vortices that are not able to flow with our present experience. And so that disconnectedness, that lack of coherence interconnectedness that may be a scar or something, of the past.
And it's very interesting the type of memories that do come up in that particular moment.
Right.
Why would that particular memory or dream experience come up for you in that very subconscious, altered state of consciousness? Why? That's still the question I don't think we can ever answer, scientifically, I think.
Well, and the scientists can sit there and argue with each other about it for a long time, as long as they like.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, we're there helping people through that.
Yeah.
So I don't ask them why. I want to know what comes from that.
Right.
Because the spirit is talking.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we talk about it. So it's like somebody tells me the other day, I was in ketamine retreat, and somebody brought up how it took them on this memory chain about their grandfather, that he had died when he was very young. He didn't have a lot of contact with his grandfather. And so it made him, because there was something he was trying to reconnect with in his sense of being with himself. And he just said, I don't know, that's what came up for him. And so I said, another perspective, again, because these are great mysteries. So like I said, they can argue the same arrogance we were talking about earlier today. It's like, not that impressive. Like, I'm not impressed by your arrogant attitude about how the brain is working, or why these certain memories come up, or why, you told me that it's the computer's shutting down, and that's why I see the white light and go through okay, that's about as solid as anything else anybody else just said, completely house of cards.
Right.
So we can relax. So then in that environment where I've been around these people healing, and we're using that to guide like why we would say something or why we would talk about something. And I said to him, you know what I see sometimes with the ayahuasca, and I see it happen with the ketamine too sometimes, is that sometimes when you shut down these networks like this, like we were just talking about, and like we see with the psilocybin research, that it's so common that they would have these mystical experiences when the networks are affected in this way by these certain class of medicines that I guess are working through different receptor systems, but they all seem to open up this mystical access in some kind of related way in its effect on the networks, among other causes.
Right.
But that's part of it. And so when you open those with the GABA or the this one or the, ibogaine, which all the what is the receptors involved.
Yeah.
But then the DMN or the networks, things shift, and then there's some kind of portal that opens for some people, and that allows for this different kind of access, that maybe other people can have access to just in their waking state.
Yeah.
But with this guy having that, I said to him, you know what happens sometimes with ayahuasca, or what they say, what I witness in the traditional kind of way of thinking. Sometimes when we all do that and do it together and we open these, it's like a beacon. It's like a beacon.
It seems like permission, I feel. There's
not just permission. I would just throw this out there for the fun of the conversation.
Yeah.
That it called the spirits.
Yeah.
And I said, I think your grandfather's looking for you. Because when you see something open, it's something you met, my grandfather.
Yeah. Yeah.
We say, like in Spanish, we say, like if I dream with my grandfather, we don't say I dream about my grandfather. Soñé con mi abuelo. I dream with my grandfather.
Yeah.
We found each other in the dream world. So I said, he's looking for you. Go look for him. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just something to say. But to me, in my heart and soul, I have a responsibility to share, what I feel.
Yeah.
And so I tell him, I think, just tell us about him. Where does he live? Where did he go? When did you lose track? Go see what that is. So sometimes there's messages, and of course there can be charlatans, and there's so much room to confuse ourselves and project into that space. And so we have to be skeptical, and we're wise to be skeptical.
Yeah.
And there's more than we are aware. There is a mystery that we're a part of.
I think this is a concept in medicine I wish we had more of. And we talk about in narrative medicine, that having narrative humility to the story that we think we are interpreting. It could be a whole different story, and it could be a whole different, feeling for that person or that experience. And how we need to be always in check with that in any kind of practice, and especially in psychedelic, medicine. I think there is this danger of interpreting and forcing our projections of our own experiences in the medicine while the person is in medicine, which is a very, very delicate balance. And it's
in this case, this was the next day. This was during a conversation, and it was just a suggestion of, maybe you should find out more about him.
Yeah.
So, but you're right. It is very delicate. It's a delicate matter.
And I think you allude to it when you had that conversation with your mom about not feeling connected with our spirituality. And we're losing that sense of spirituality in our daily lives. As we've used to live, we used to really think about in our practices, you pray 5 times a day. You're constant in check with that reality that you are nothing in front of the bigger being of things. And there's a reminder, there's a ritual. But so much of that is being lost in so many ways in our culture, in our and all of the things that we have to do in the daily struggles.
And I think
in our environment. And that's really why we're seeing this epidemic of mental health and this urgency for something to connect us back to that.
Yeah.
And psychedelics and the psychedelic renaissance is very much driven by that factor, I feel.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah.
I would say just that the modern society. And so that's why we're trying to, and I'm saying the psychedelic renaissance may be helping to illuminate like a more universal spirituality. And so there is the capacity for a more universal spirituality, which is about what you said, coming into that reverence to feel and be nourished by that interconnectedness and that wisdom, and to help open us to greater humility and again, wisdom and guidance, versus being a springboard for religious war.
Yeah.
So that would be usually greed rot. I would go ahead and say 100% driving that.
Yeah.
I have to say that is and the other force of it, that there's a major red flag of like, is this greed out of control?
Right.
And now we're doing this in the name of spirituality. So because of these kinds of religious traumas that so many of us have been through, and that people, the separation of science and spirituality and all these things have come to try to open a door to a more universal kind of thing that has been thought of up to now like as secular.
Yeah.
But the secular is giving rise to this. So the psychedelic clinical renaissance has, following medical treatment of human beings, has given rise to this reawakening of an interest in spiritual healing.
Yeah. Which is, I think, the commonality that all psychedelics have is the ego, and disengaging with the ego mind or the ego being for a period of time, however long that is in that state, and having that sense of awareness to something else. And as we talk about the mystical experiences, the external, internal unity, the sense of empathy and connection, that seems to be the commonality in what we see in this work. And I would also say it's not just medicine, breath work, the other ways of living, the other ways of just being in nature and just being in awe. I mean, just being in awe of a simple looking at the flower and just think, I just can't imagine how beautiful this is. I think those are the small psychedelic experiences we're having all the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
What a wonderful, wide-ranging conversation. I want to just allude to this idea that I think we've been getting at, is the beauty of the human spirit itself, and just how precious it is something that our patients really wake up to sometimes. You mentioned that some people can feel that with the medicine, some people feel it, with different traditions and things like that. But all along throughout history, for hundreds of years, that human spirit has been co-opted, monetized, right? Ravaged, the Wetiko, the cannibalism. This is not a new place to be in that way. This is an old foe, right? This is a foe that's been around for generations. And it's so deeply embedded into our systems that we may not even be able to see it, because our culture tells us that everything is okay, but we feel it, right? Our nervous systems feel that greed rot. And so when we're talking about this mental health crisis, this is a being, a spirituality, a consciousness that feels misaligned with itself. Its body and its kind of way of living and the way of being are not where they should be. And yet here we are, and sometimes when I talk to people like you, Joe, who are on the front lines, you put your body in front of the courts. Like, you didn't shy away from that. You didn't back away from putting your foot on that and saying, no, this is the line. This is where we stand. And I just, in medicine, always, I feel this way in which our ancestors are looking at us and are smiling, are seeing where we are right now with a sense of pride, because I can't imagine, what it must have been like for those hundreds of years to go through the absolute decimation of our, kind of indigenous ways of being. Not like the hundreds of thousands of people, the traditions, like we are just trying to hold on to the remnants of it right now. Like a lot of it has faded.
Yeah.
The Amazon is under threat. Like we are not out of the woods yet. And so as we are kind of going into this 2026, this book that you're taking around, I'd like to maybe leave you with our final question. It's like, what are you curious about? What is driving you? What is bringing you to the fight again and again and again? And because it is such a generational, such a ancestral, like, at least for the three of us, I know for a fact we resonate on this, is I came to this work and I felt my grandfather's hand guiding me in some way because he was a healer. We feel these spirits through us and we heed it, not knowing where they're going to lead us, right? I'll leave you there.
Yeah. I think it's like, to me, it's, this foe that you're talking about, or this dark side, or the destructive side that, maybe it's always around the foe, in this realm of life for us and through history. And yet, it needs more balance. The path of light, the path of healing, the path of wisdom needs to grow right now to balance it out. It's not that necessarily we're going to conquer the foe and it's never going to be rise again. I like Lord of the Rings, this. It's like they're going to, they're going to take them down and they'll probably try to come back one day stronger than ever. And it'll be another round. But we're trying to come out of that. The times were such that the greed and everything, had a little more latitude and people kind of forgot how bad it could get, if we just give ourselves over to that and, indulge in that and romanticize that. And then you kind of learn the hard lessons and then the wisdom kind of gains more traction again. And so we're part of that force. And so for the sake of the earth, for the sake of each other, for the sake of the children, for the sake of our own lives, that even if we don't save the world, that when we lay down to die, we can examine our lives. And that is also makes a big difference to people. What did you do? What were the circumstances of the world, for Buddha, for these other individuals? It wasn't all worked out. There was a lot of chaos. But, the ecosystem was definitely healthier. We can say that. We can agree on that. So trying to find some more opportunity for life to thrive, that's what we seek, and for the health and wellness of our world. And even if we can't save it, even if it's over the edge, then the legacy for the survivors is still something that interests us. So I don't know. Back to the Lord of the Rings. I really enjoyed Rings of Power on Amazon Prime. No one cared. No one seemed to pay attention. I think we talked already to Ali about it, but it was all about the rise of Sauron, so they go back to but now the Hobbit, the Mordor, now we're ready to take him on. He's been sitting there too long. But when did it start? How did it get up that high with all these elevated beings and the elves and everybody and all their wisdom and their connectedness? And you see, it was this ego thing, right? And it was this diabolical ego thing to deceive people, to let people fool themselves into, this isn't what I think it is. This is good. And I know this looks bad and it feels bad, but I'm sold. And so you go for it. And then there's a scene where now the big elf, I think Galadriel, who's so ashamed that she sold out. She fell for it, to the great deceiver, and gave him the keys to the kingdom. And now she's in so much shame for destroying her world. And now she's confronting him directly. Now I know who you are. You're Sauron. And he's doing what he does, which is the bluff of, you are never, ever, ever going to be able to beat me. Never. I am the most powerful being that exists. And it's true. That's his story.
Yeah.
And so she says with her, whatever she has, she says, the good people of Middle Earth will always resist you. And that's true.
Yeah.
So we're not just gonna roll over children.
Yeah.
Now Never. That's never, ever. We're human beings on this earth. Everybody
I
knows
think that the
that.
struggle will always
love
be
that.
there.
The struggle with it. People want
Always
to have a
will
good
always
time.
be there.
People want to live something healthy.
Yeah.
That's
I
a
love
human
that.
being, like a tree that grows.
I love
You
that
know?
because you mentioned that it's the fear of how susceptible we are, vulnerable we are to somebody who says, I'm the most powerful and you can't get past me. And then the reality, which is we are people and we're humans and we will always try harder and we will always go towards wholeness and justice.
I was in New York and there was a display that I saw in a museum. It says, we are the 99.9%. We are the 99.9%. So we have power. We are, and to somebody say that they have power over you is them asserting their power over you. You don't have to accept that.
So we have this situation, just to finish it off,
Yeah.
for whatever it's worth,
Thank you.
where they say that in the United States, that the big pharma, for
Yeah.
example, would never allow certain things to happen, because it's against their greed rot or the business interests of certain entities that are unfortunately a little bit lost, in that. We can have compassion for these people that are going to live down this lifespan. This is what I did. So we don't know. And some of it's good, and some of it's helping. But still there's this part they said, oh no, they're not going to let this happen. So the MDMA went up for, the approval, FDA. They said no. After I was part of the MAPS research with the epigenetics thing that we did, hearing very closely about their interrelationship with the FDA, every step of the way, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, how much communication there was to try to put everything in order to their liking, at least negotiate it. And then to have it turned on them was really kind of a shock. They have their argument and people can kind of run with that argument, or they could inject the social media with the counter argument, as we see so commonly in today's world. And so then that's what happened. And they shut down all this momentum of the psychedelic movement, and a lot of venture capital people pulled the back. Forget this. These guys don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're up against. They don't know how they're doing it. They can't do this. They're, hippies. And so then, Australia says,
we don't need
pretty solid evidence. We're ready to move forward with the MDMA. We're not because we care who's what or you're right, or because we have people that need help. And this is very powerful, it looks like, to help our people. So we want to start exploring this. Canada as well. So they say, you're never, ever, going to be able to go back to your medical school and tell this story. Like I told, it's the suffering that has brought us here, of your mom, of your child, of somebody that breaks your heart. That's why we're here. I didn't come because I want to talk to you, and so that's it. And so then that's what's happening.
And the thing is, you didn't even know your heart was broken until you saw it broken.
Until you saw it. And then what happened?
That wound and you said, oh my God, this was the wound that was hurting me.
The regime that we were so concerned about said, you know what? We're going to say, okay.
Yeah.
Whatever the FDA said 2 years ago, I don't know. We're not so worried about that anymore. We're going to go ahead and tip the scales.
Yeah.
Because like Rick Perry, the ex-governor of Texas, said at the MAPS conference a few years ago, there's nothing about this psychedelic stigma that is more important than these people's lives.
Right. Yeah. Right. Well said.
So
well stated.
So that's why. That's the spirit. That's the spirit that keeps breathing.
And such a modern spirit you have,
for
Joe.
trying
I
to help
love
people.
this. Yeah,
you do have a modern spirit. I love that.
Modern
spirit. You actually do have a modern spirit.
It's called demonstrating the value of spiritual healing in modern healthcare, modern spirit. We need more support. We're expanding our mission.
Oh, beautiful.
Reach out to us.
Absolutely. Yeah. How can people reach you and find you?
Modernspirit.org is a big thing that we're promoting. That's our big coming forward thing. drjoetafur.com has some things on there. We're trying to get people to read the medicine song, look at Fellowship of the River now that these things are more and more okay.
And it's available on Audible.
It's on Audible,
on Spotify.
Nice.
I haven't put on Spotify yet. I haven't given in. I should. I'm on the verge. I'm on the verge, but I'm giving it more time.
Well, it's a very good book. And I read it, 3/4 of it, I read it after our meeting. And after I read 3/4 of it, and it took me about another month to finish. But, I read through it. It was such a beautiful read. And I'm going to post my review as well on this.
Thank
And
you.
I feel like this really speaks to so many people. And I do look forward to having you coming to our center to do a reading. And we'll make that announcement to our audience as well. And Simi, I hope you to be there as well.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jo, for being here today.
Thanks for joining us on the Two Curious MD podcast. We hope today's episode inspired you to ask new questions and explore fresh perspectives. We challenge you to ask us those unasked questions that you're curious about in your medical practice, condition, health, and wellness.
If you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe, share it with somebody just as curious, and leave us a review. It helps us keep the curiosity alive. Post or comment with a question or curious inquiry that you have and seek to explore or learn with us. Stay curious, and we'll see you next time.